Now, please welcome CEO at Involta, Bruce Lehrman.
Good morning, and thank you for joining the Leadership Track sponsored by Involta. Involta orchestrates IT transformation journeys using well-defined and rigorous processes to deliver hybrid cloud solutions, consulting, and data center services tailored to our clients' business drivers. We pair consulting with the ability to leverage our own co-location facilities and infrastructure assets to deliver highly secure and reliable solutions every day. To learn more, visit involta.com. This morning's session, A Walk in Our Shoes, Developing and Implementing DEI Strategies and Practice Organization-Wide, features a panel of tremendous speakers. First, Kingsley Goborn, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Senior Consultant at Unity Point. Kingsley started with Unity Point Meriter in October 2019 as a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager and transitioned to a system role as DEI Senior Consultant for Unity Point in October 2020. Kingsley previously worked at Old Nations Bank as AVP of Community Outreach for the state of Wisconsin and Minnesota. Kingsley's background also includes work at UW-Madison as coordinator of their pre-college diversity pipeline program. Kingsley was born in Jamaica and immigrated to the United States in 1989. Delight Deloney, Field Services Director at SHRM. Delight is an award-winning, passionate people developer with a background in human resources and counseling. At SHRM, she is responsible for overseeing the fostering and promotion of memberships, educational programs, certifications, and services focused on advancing the profession of human resources and creating better workplaces for all. She is an experienced HR professional specializing in people development, diversity, equity, and inclusion, organizational design, and change management. She has worked extensively in the aerospace industry. Prior to joining SHRM, Delight led development for the HR function at the Boeing Company. And Denise Early, Executive Administrator and Executive Inclusion Council member at Principal Financial Group. Denise is the Executive Administrator to Kathy Kay, Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer of the Principal Financial Group. Denise currently serves on the Executive Inclusion Council at Principal. Prior to that, she served on the company's Diversity Council from 2012 to 2019 and on the steering committee for two of the company's employee resources groups, One Ability and African American Black Employee Resource Group. This panel is moderated by Jennifer Murphy, Director of Innovation Services at NewBoCo, the parent nonprofit of the Iowa Startup Accelerator, the Entrepreneur Academy, and Delta V Code School. At NewBoCo, Jennifer is focused on building innovation and agility in organizations across the state of Iowa, contributing to a strong ecosystem in our state. As you're listening to today's panel, feel free to ask any questions you have in the Q&A section for them to address. Please join me in welcoming the moderator and panelists. Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you and good morning. Well, the calendar year 2020 was a roller coaster of everything, and 2021 seems to be offering more tickets to ride. It's also been a time of reflection and decision making. Many organizations have taken a hard look in the mirror at how we create a diverse, inclusive, and equitable culture for not only our staff, but the communities we currently serve and those we want to serve. Our panel today will share some perspectives about how their organization is navigating these discussions and actions and what they're seeing in the communities they serve. So let's get started with our first question. So we're going to kick off with, how do you build a diverse and equitable workplace? What are some of the first steps that organizations can take, or how do they even start the conversation? Delight, I would ask you to kick us off with that question.
Sure. Really organizations have got to create an environment that allows for open communication and acceptance of employees as they are. So often we hear, come as you are, bring your whole self to work, and then employees get there, but really they want assimilation in the workplace. So really, truly accepting employees for who they are. And then you got to make DE&I a part of the DNA of the organization. And you do this by making it a part of the mission, vision, and values of that organization. And then you want to make it measurable and tie it to performance goals and to outcomes for leadership so that they know that DE&I is a serious matter for the company. And so there really are just so many resources that are available to start the conversation. On the SHRM website, there are downloadable and printable conversation starters about DE&I. And you can start by first just recognizing that a conversation needs to take place and then offering the safe space for that to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Delight. Kingsley, what would you add to that? How do we build a diverse, equitable workplace? And what are some steps that Unity Point's been taking? What do you advise?
Definitely. Well, one of the things we have to first realize is that this is going to be a journey. And we often talk about that to describe the time it's going to take to actually go through organizational transformation. It does take time. One of those first places that you're going to want to start is really in being able to envision. And as Delight has that beautiful picture behind her of Dr. Martin Luther King, you really have to start with a dream. Now, before you can start that dream, you have to be grounded in what the current situation of your organization is. And that's going to take some time and to understand, how do the persons who are coming into those walls every day, how do they feel? What is their level of belonging? And with that, you can start to put together a plan. You can start to dream. You can start to envision where that end goal is. And once you attain that, that's when you can start actually putting that plan together in order to become successful.
Great. Thank you. All right, Denise, what would you add to this conversation?
Really great points. Thank you for sharing. I think what I would add to the conversation, or to the points that have already been made, the great points that have already been made, is that to ask employees what's important to them. Start by asking your employee base and that's relative to a large company or a small company. What's working well, what's not working, and then you build your strategy around that. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way to build a strategy. I think that inclusiveness is very important, and you get to diversity through inclusiveness. And that happens when you begin to ask the questions that you need to ask, and then hold leaders accountable to have those conversations.
Great. I heard some great themes around really listening to people and empathy and even understanding that it's a process, that there's work that has to be going on a continuous basis. Now, this first question really focused on taking us internally to our workplace, but we also know that our workplaces are part of the communities that we serve. And here in Iowa, that can create a fun challenge for us in these communities. So how do organizations help to work toward change from a community perspective as we look at those communities we're serving? Does someone want to kick us off, have a burning desire, or I will pick?
I think I can start.
All right, thanks, Denise.
One of the things that we do at Principal, and that I do personally, is serve in the community. And I think that you match your talents of your organization along with the needs in the communities, and that's how you build more inclusive communities, using your talents that you have and matching those up with just the needs in the community.
All right. Delight?
I absolutely agree with her. And then the other part is making sure that the organization mirrors the community. Are the people in the organization, do they live in the community? Do they look like the people in the community? But I think Denise made a great point.
Yeah.
Those are two great points. You definitely have to show up and be present, and you definitely want to have that voice right within your organization that represents the outside. I think as we look downstream at some of the other opportunities, it's really, how do we engage with our communities? How do you engage with your suppliers, your vendors? And those are some other opportunities that you have to increase that diversity and to better support the communities that exist around you.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the supply chain piece of that, because I think that sometimes that's an overlooked piece. We think about, how can I go out and volunteer with groups or be a part of an organization or serve on a board? But gosh, putting the power of the purse to work and really, buying services or buying products from companies that are in your local area and are coming from different perspectives maybe than you would normally come from is really important to the economy and the people in those businesses. Anybody want to add anything to that conversation? Otherwise, I've got more for you. All right. So I think this is really related to this idea of reaching out into the community. We see a lot of legislation going across our, state government, local governments, et cetera, with respect to just different initiatives around the state. With a lot of that local legislation happening, what do we see as a panel here organizations are doing to keep people in Iowa? And this is, what are some of the successful things that are working? And if you've got a lesson we can learn from that as well, that would be great. But if we're really looking at what do we think is working? Delight, do you want to take that from a SHRM perspective, kick that off?
So from a SHRM perspective, we definitely make sure that our state councils and our chapters are partnering with local law firms so that they get firsthand understanding of the laws that specifically affect Iowans. And by doing that, they stay on top of what is happening, the laws that are affecting them, and then they can share that in their workplaces so that they know what is necessary to keep their people in Iowa, and they're not looking to move outside.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. Do you want to add to that?
Well, again, we are organizations, a microcosm of all the communities that we're in. And when things like this change in the community, we really do need to understand what the impact is going to be on those members and try to find ways to help mitigate those. In healthcare, we want to be able to treat and take care of every single human being and meet them where they're at. And then for us, it's really also important to advocate. And that means providing the education and at times the support for various groups in order for them to really lobby and to discuss why it's important that they have our support. And so I think that area of advocacy is something that organizations have an opportunity to do. It's really to advocate for those that are supporting and working for you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Denise, did you want to jump in on that?
I think the only thing that I would add to what's been said, great points all around, is that as an organization at Principal, we've seen great strides during COVID in the ability to hire and retain remote workers. And so I think as we continue to move to a remote workforce, just as a nation, as a company, I do believe that that's going to bring more diversity to Principal. I do believe. I also think that it's our responsibility as a company and just as people to foster an inclusion or an environment of inclusion. And so I think that the onus does it also maybe like even we're talking about legislation, but I think it really does filter down to us as well. That's all I would add.
Yeah, I'm going to ask just a follow up to that is, what does inclusion look like? That word has come up so many times. And when we think it's an easy word, I think, to get diluted and just kind of throw it out there as a buzzword, right? And what does that look like when we're being inclusive? I would love to hear all of your thoughts on that. Delight, you want to start us off?
Sure. I always love to think of the analogy of inclusion as being diversity is inviting everyone to the dance, but inclusion is being asked to dance. That really is such a great analogy that gives you the depiction of what it looks like to be included. Everyone is involved, everyone is accepted, everyone's perspectives are taken into consideration, is really what inclusion is about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Delight, that's such a great point and great analogy. And I'll probably only just take it one step further in that with inclusion, we not only want to invite you to the dance and ask you to dance, but every once in a while, we're going to play some of your music. And we're going to decorate the dance to reflect your culture as well and your contributions into it. And so then that gets us to a point of belonging. And when you feel like you belong in that space, the invite and that intent is even more powerful, right? And it really drives that home. And so thank you for getting the ball rolling, the delight with that. And thanks for allowing me just to tag on where I do really feel that that is the next step, is creating that sense of belonging.
I love that. I'm going to jot that down.
Yeah.
Please do.
That's a good one. Yeah. Denise, did you want to add anything to that idea of what does inclusion look like?
I don't think I can. That was a beautiful illustration, and I love to dance. That's all I'll add to it.
That was pretty good.
Yeah, it was very great. Love it.
Yeah, I love that addition to the dance metaphor. I think that's a beautiful way to extend that one. Thank you for that. Yeah. So if we think about, we're inviting people to the dance, we're asking them to dance, we're playing their music. Now, how do we measure then what success looks like? If we're doing that, how do we know for sure that we're being successful? Are there specific metrics that we could look at, like attrition? Is there some sort of magical survey out there that gives us all the answers? How do we know we're doing well? How do we know we're doing good work? What are some of the things that you all have seen or done that you would maybe offer some of the audience, some of the leaders that are watching today?
Well, I'll jump in and start. I think one of the things that you have to remember is, depending on where you start in your journey, success is going to look differently for you, right? And so in the very beginning, once you're doing that envisioning, when you understand your current state, what are those things that you want to accomplish? What are those dials that you want to turn up in order to affect those final outcomes? With that said, whoever the end user is, it's most important to go to them. And so we find that being able to have surveys in which you have information, data over a period of time, that way you can ask those questions to make sure that you're actually achieving the goal that you want. Now, once you ask those questions, it's important that when you have your data back, that we don't look at it as a huge aggregate, right? Because a lot of things can get lost in that data. It's really important to segregate that data out to make sure that all those little voices that you might have within the organization, those that aren't always represented in the highest numbers, that they're still experiencing the same thing that you see in your large group as well. And if that's disparities there, then the conversation is, how do you shrink those gaps with those disparities within? But I do think being able to have a form of data collection that is directed truly at the end user, those individuals that you're trying to affect, and have them respond and share with you where you are in your journey.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think about data. In 2019, SHRM did a culture report, and it looked at the cost of toxic workplace cultures, the cost of lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in workplaces. And, when we think about companies, the most important thing to companies is what? It's the bottom line, it's the dollar, right? And so then you start to turn attrition into dollar signs for companies. And if the attrition is related to lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then you start to see, then companies start to see that we need to do something different, because we're wasting, the reports show that companies spend over $223 billion in turnover costs, right? That's a huge number when you put it into perspective. And any CFO will say, we probably need to look at our DE&I practices so that we can reduce the number of turnover, because we're wasting money. And so you really have to look at what's important. How do you start to put and I hope I'm saying this right and I'm not being offensive, but you have to put the dollar sign to it as well. And then you also have to look at the outcomes.
Thank you.
Okay, I thought I heard someone get ready to say something.
No, you're good. Keep going. Do you have more? Keep going.
No, I'll let someone else jump in.
Thank you. Denise, did you want to add anything to that measurement piece?
I don't have anything to add to that. Maybe I do. So I feel that metrics look different for each organization depending on where you're at in your journey, right? Back to Kingsley's earlier point, I do think building meaningful metrics around your goals as a company in the diversity and inclusion space is very impactful, very powerful. And then I also think that holding leaders accountable to those results as part of their goals is success that we've seen here at Principal. And then education, there's no substitute for education, right? To get to the metrics that you want to have. That's all I would add.
Yeah, and I think that you've all brought up something, it's just maybe a part two to this question, which is, organizations are at different stages. Some are just trying to figure out, I'm being a little glib when I say this, but how to spell diversity, and others have, more mature programs, and they're actively recruiting, and they're, really experimenting and doing great things. How do you decide maybe how to integrate, or which initiatives to really start to introduce first? And I have a feeling it goes back to some of the data collection that you all have mentioned already. But are there other things for organizations to take into account once they have the data and now they want to start integrating this into, an early stage in a company, or even as it matures? What are some of the decision points you might look for?
Well, I think an important part of this process is to make sure that we've had some conversations and done our work to envision and strategize what we're trying to accomplish before we put any actual initiative into play. I think a risk that many organizations and companies have at times is to quickly try to adopt an initiative without really having a long-term strategy and goal, and the resources and the buy-in from leadership. And so what ends up happening is you might just adopt an initiative, and then when it doesn't work, diversity doesn't work, DEI doesn't work, right? And so I think, from that standpoint, once you have that strategic plan and know where you want to go, it's really up to the organization where they feel most comfortable in starting. Our new CEO, Clay Holderman here at Unity Point Health, shared with me once this idea of better is best. When you're on this journey, every step forward is a better for your organization, right? And that is something that you have to be able to learn to celebrate and to feel good about. That all these little steps, the conversations that you're having, the groups as you create them, it's the actual journey that helps shape that culture. And so not the right or wrong place, just making sure that you've done your planning and preparation to go on it.
Right. Denise, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think so. I think another point to make with regard to what Kingsley just shared, again, great points, would be that every company is in a different place in their inclusion, or diversity and inclusion rather, journey. And I think it's okay to try things. The other thing, I think it's okay to ask employees, hand out surveys, pass out surveys, and ask employees what's working well, what's not working well, and where do we need to focus, and then build your strategy around that. And I think it's something, we've tried things at Principal that have been wildly successful. We've tried other things that haven't been. And so I think being willing to try and just start by starting is a very simple way to do that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Delight, do you want to jump in?
Denise really summarized and put out some points that were really important from Kingsley. I was just thinking, ask employees, and ask all of the employees, because if you don't, then you don't know what's happening, in the organization. And honestly, post surveys or surveys where employees can be anonymous really are helpful in their telling, and they'll give you more information, especially when employees feel like there is that anonymous factor to it. They are typically more open.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a good point. That was has been a point of discussion in a few different conversations. Is there value to those pulse surveys? And I think you just highlighted that there is.
Yes.
To be able to give that venue. Is there any downside to those kinds of surveys? Is there? I think it's just to get a balanced perspective on it. Is there any reason a company wouldn't want to do a pulse survey?
If they don't want the truth? I don't.
There you go.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Nailed it in one. I love it. Yeah. And I mean, I think we've heard that time and again from the three of you. It's just how important it is to talk to people and not try to isolate yourself in a room and make about a bunch of decisions about what the organization's diversity is going to be. The other pitfall or hazard that has been discussed, and I've read so many times about, it gets treated as a side project or it's an HR problem. HR needs to deal with this diversity thing. And what I heard from you all is that it's an everybody, all hands, everybody's involved, invited to the conversation. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
Yeah. How do you do that with a huge organization like a Unity Point or a Principal? How do you make sure you're hearing all the voices?
Right. You really have, first, you have to start top down with the expectation that this is something that we are going to be supporting, and that the individuals then have the ability to share, right, and to help guide the journey that we're going to be on. And then it's really up to helping to develop leaders within the organization that can really support the teams in the way that we'll be able to kind of harness that type of growth within the organization. And so, how that looks like is being able to vision and the expectation of the leadership, provide support and resources, and then be able to listen, have your managers and leaders listen, and have that have individuals take responsibility for their department, their teams, in making those changes. And pretty soon you have a lot of action happening in the organization, and these things continue to bubble up. And what we've seen is best practices then start getting adopted. And it really can be organic, in which not everything has to be written out as a policy of this is what we're going to do, or this is part of our strategic plan. What you'll start to see in the organization is a lot of efforts that are just being suggested by team members, supported by their managers, and then elevated to be supported by the organization. And that's always a good sign to see.
Great. Thank you. Delight or Denise, did you want to add to that?
I think
he
nailed it.
Yeah, he nailed it.
All right.
I agree.
We're not going to touch it.
Please touch it. Add to that.
Denise,
Perfect.
but maybe just a little. Go ahead, Denise.
I was just going to reiterate the point of survey. We conduct quarterly surveys at Principal. One of the questions is an inclusion question now that we do ask, and the results of that are sent up to the leader of that team, and the expectation is that actions will be taken against the feedback that we receive, right? As leaders, it's our responsibility. So we do at Principal put a lot of the onus onto leaders of teams to have those conversations.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
You bet.
All right, there was a question I think that came in that is relevant to this that we got into the chat here. And it goes back to the point, I think, Denise, you made this about being able to hire a remote workforce. And I'm going to start with just kind of a broad maybe question, and then I'll go to the specifics of the question that was asked. But as we do make this transition, this is, for some of us, it's old hat. It's not a big deal to work with remote teams. For others, we're in smaller organizations where we've been face-to-face. Are there things that we need to consider that are different in a remote work environment from a diversity perspective than when we're live in person in an office seeing each other every day? And what have you all seen maybe that are things that we should really be paying attention to as leaders in our businesses?
One of the things that first came to mind for me was accommodations. When you think about workers who may have any form of disability, being able to make an accommodation for that person in their particular space. So maybe the company has to send a specialized laptop or computer or provide specialized programming, but really keep in mind accommodations.
Yeah, great point. Kingsley or Denise, would you add anything to that?
I would only, again, add when you talk about accommodations, it's where your individuals and employees are starting at. We do realize that not everyone is starting with maybe the technology and resources at home to work from home. They might not have, based on their rural location or geographic location, or socioeconomic status, there might be some barriers. I think part of an organization's journey, and this is something that we've done at Unity Point, is to really assess what those needs are prior to making our decisions, and then being able to find ways to mitigate what that might be should they come. And so if there are going to be issues of technology and resources, are there ways we can mitigate it? Is there geographical location barriers that we can address? And if not, how do we then still support those individuals? Because we don't want to create a situation that those who have better opportunities can then have a more flexible and workable work life, and those who don't are still are experiencing even a more difficult challenge. And so I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind on this idea of remote workers is, if you're an Iowa-based company, it's quite possible you'll have workers across the country anymore, or vice versa. We could have, people working in Iowa that are actually working for other organizations outside of Iowa. And I'm not sure if there's something we need to do about that. Is there a difference if if my headquarters is Cedar Rapids and I've got employees in New York and California, and you're working across time zones and you're working across different environments and living situations and whatnot, how does that impact our diversity strategy and how we're planning for diversity in any way from where you all sit? It feels a little related to this.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like with the workforce going to more remote or being more open to remote workers, for a lot of companies, it's going to provide them with a greater opportunity for diversity. One thing I hear so often is, well, I live in this rural town and it's predominantly this or that, and so there's not a lot of diversity. So how do I make my organization diverse if it's not here? Well, now with work being remote, it's right here in your town, and you can have a much more diverse workforce because of the remote nature.
Yeah. Whereas the pool was maybe this big, now it's this big. Yeah. Good. Sorry, Kingsley, go ahead.
No, she brought up a great point. Once you've looked in your space and town, I think that the organizations need to make sure that they still do that first. I've heard from organizations in the past that have said, well, we have no diversity, or oftentimes we're not able to hire from our diverse groups within our community. And so what I wouldn't want organizations to invest in is to just quickly disregard the communities that they're in and around to then, go outside of the state. There might be ways, I think, that could be equitable and impactful in developing opportunities and bridging the gap, whether it's with licensing or education or training, to make sure that you tap into what you do have available locally first. And again, once you realize that, hey, we don't have the talent or diversity here locally, then it's how do we attract it and bring that in, for sure.
I do think, if I could add one thing, I do think at Principal we've hired, I get this word wrong all the time, or this title wrong all the time, but I think it's called diverse sourcers, not to be confused with sorcerers, but sourcers. We have diverse sourcers that are based in, and I actually checked with HR on that word. That is the right way to say it. We have two people that are based out of Atlanta, and their job is to look at the postings that we have open and find those diverse candidates to join Principal. And we've seen great success with that to date. So it's the only thing I would add.
Great. So I think, the specific nature of Christina Rydell's question really was to that how piece that you started with, Kinsley, the how do we help when we're hiring a remote workforce, overcome those socioeconomic differences, those technology differences, the opportunity void that some can have depending on where they are, located in the country. So talking with them, and understanding what their gaps are feels like a big part of the solution. Is there anything else that we should be paying attention to as organizations once you've cleared maybe the physical kinds of barriers that a remote worker might encounter? Is there anything else that we should be thinking about?
Well, I think that sense of belonging is really important, especially if you're doing remote work. We oftentimes are faced with situations now where some of the team is working from home, but then the other team is at the organization, working within the building or the walls. And how are they engaged with management and leadership versus your staff at home? Is there opportunities to reach out to them more, to have fireside type chats where you're just getting together to check in with the group? And if you're going to be doing an event where there might be lunch provided, do you have ways to maybe have deliveries done for those who are working from home? As small as those things might be, what it does is allows them to truly feel connected and that they're having the same experience, regardless of working from home or within the organization. But that would just be one tip that I would share.
Okay. Denise, Delight, you have anything you want to add? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Delight. You were already there.
I do, but you go ahead, Delight. Go ahead.
Okay. I would add, and Kingsley kind of touched on this, are the growth opportunities, because you're correct. If you have people who are in the office, they're right there in front of the managers, in front of the boss, and they get more of that face time, whereas people who are remote don't necessarily have that. But you have to create those opportunities so that growth and opportunities are as available to those who are working remotely as it is for those who work in the office.
Thank you.
It's a great point. I think what I would add is just from a very logistical perspective, one of the things I've noticed is I'm back in the office pretty much full time due to my internet connection at home. And so one of the things I have noticed is just in a hybrid meeting environment that we have now, after being remote for so long, and now we're all in the office, the people that are remote now tend to get forgotten. So I think one very simple way to bring them into the conversation is during the meeting time, pause and ask,
yeah,
do they have thoughts that they want to share? Because it's very easy once we're in person to focus on the room, and very easy to go back to our old habits, pre-COVID, I call it, of not listening to those on the phone as much or on the Teams call. So I would add that.
Yeah. Good. Back to themes of inclusivity for sure. Yes. All right. I'm going to transition here to a question in the chat. It says, for a new person joining an organization, how do you help them understand and appreciate the value and importance of DE&I to them and to the organization? The two sides of that. Would anybody like to start with that one? I can see you're all thinking, so I'm going to give you a second to formulate your thought.
And I'm actually going to ask you to repeat the question if you don't mind.
Sure. So for a new person joining an organization, how do you help them understand and appreciate the value and importance of DE&I to them and to the organization?
I think I can start.
Okay.
One of the things that we just recently implemented at Principal is education. So as part of a new hire onboarding, they have a number of classes that there are a number of things they have to check the box and sign. And one of the things that we've added to that is education around diversity and inclusion. We've used an external company to help us with that training. It is to be completed within the first 30 to 60 days of their employment, and just gives them a very early picture of how we view diversity and inclusion at Principal. This is very recent, and so I expect that to be impactful.
Delight, did you want to add something to that?
Honestly, I'm still formulating my thoughts. I'm going to defer to.
All right, Kingsley.
Yeah, I would also say that having leadership be present, right, in those early trainings, whether it's a message from the CEO or other leaders, also sends a signal that the organization is committed to this work, and they see that those individuals are engaged in the work participation on committees and boards, in their messaging goes out to the organization. That can really reinforce for an individual who's joining that D&I is truly a top-down priority for the organization, and help them appreciate it. The one thing I would just only pause is to make sure that we don't have the idea that we will indoctrinate individuals. We do still want to have diversity of thought. We want to be able to have individuals still bring their selves to work. The idea is to how do we do it together as an organization where everyone is feeling engaged and feeling like they belong. And that's the culture that we want to really help them adopt and to understand.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that's a great point. So you made me think about, something I said earlier about making sure that it is a part of the mission, vision, and values of that organization. That makes it very real from the moment that they apply to that job. They know that this is what the company stands for and is about. And so it kind of puts in their mind that this is what is expected when I come into the organization. So really having it written, again, into the DNA of the organization, that DE&I is important to them.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
A lot of acronyms there.
I know, that was a mouthful. Acronym soup. Oh. So let's go to like the other end of that spectrum then. So not just bringing people in and getting them, part of the conversation is maybe the way I would characterize that. What about those team members who are feeling, it's what's often referred to as diversity fatigue? They're discouraged or they're disillusioned by the lack of progress, or they're maybe not seeing the change that they had hoped to see, or they're frustrated by some of the legislation that feels beyond their control, even, that's out there in their environment. How do we coach and lead and manage and mentor those individuals that are just getting tired?
One of the things that we I'm sorry, I just started. I didn't even say, can I start?
Please go ahead.
I just jumped right in. One of the things that we do at Principal is we've been holding what we call courageous conversations. It's a safe place for employees to meet, to talk about the things that are top of mind, racial injustice, for one. And we've seen success with that. People feeling very fatigued, people feeling very doubtful about the future. Our employee resource groups have held courageous conversations, and just providing that platform for people to talk is very, very impactful, and it helps all of us to move forward.
Great, thank you.
I love that. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I love having that conversation with them. And one thing I think about is, where's the fatigue coming from? Is it that they're hearing diversity, equity, and inclusion too much? Is it that they're seeing so much on the news and people are saying now we have to have these conversations in the workplace? Really identifying where that fatigue is coming from. And it goes back again to having the open conversations with the employees, whether it's in person or it's through a survey.
Sure. Kingsley, would you add anything?
I will just say that, Denise, and for both Delight, I think that's the most important part, is to be able to have the conversation. Because oftentimes when you see fatigue, that's really an indicator of which your intentions aren't having the impact that individuals were hoping for, or maybe the vision wasn't clear enough in the very beginning. And so there's that disconnect has created individuals to either stop engaging in certain ways, or just feel like I'm just overwhelmed with all the things that are happening. And so having those conversations are key to really identify what it is, and then for the leadership and those in the organizations to come up with solutions together on how do we bring them back, how do we get them re-engaged, because it's important, again, to the mission and the vision to support D&I.
Yeah, and maybe another, I'm not sure if it's another spoke in this wheel or an entirely different wheel, But one of you alluded to this earlier. I think, Delight, you started with this, matching the actions with the words. And I think that's, part of the conversations that I've been having with people over the last couple of years really is, you don't want to be the organization that's just saying stuff, and you don't want to be the leader that's just putting words on a wall. You don't, the phrase that gets tossed around is, we don't want to be performative, right? We don't want to just look good. We want to be good. And so, I'm not sure if there's a how question in there or not, but I would maybe appreciate some commentary on that particular topic, because I know it's one that's circulating among organizations.
Yeah, and I think we saw that a lot in 2020, when particularly after George Floyd was murdered, and companies came forward to say, you know what, I realized that I've had a hand in racial inequity in the workplace, and so I'm going to put money into the communities. I'm going to put money into these historically Black colleges and universities. So they were trying to go beyond the words that they had been using for so long. And they're saying, okay, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to support these communities so that they have a better opportunity to not be as impacted by the racial injustice and iniquities that are taking place with them and in their communities.
I think organizations found themselves in a really difficult spot, and I will give some of that to the organizations in that with all the events from last year, with social media, with all the things, external factors that we have, I think many organizations felt this overwhelming pressure just to act.
Yeah.
And many of those actions were with the best intent and great ideas. Now we are to a point where now it's, how do you sustain what it is that you said that you were going to incorporate and do those many months ago. And this is where, if an organization didn't engage in crucial conversations, envisioning, deep strategic planning, buy-in from the senior leadership, this is when things become difficult for the organization. Because COVID has caused financial issues as well, right? And organizations have suffered. And so as you're making tough decisions moving forward with budgets and staffing, how is DEI going to be prioritized? And many organizations are I think, struggling at the top because they may not have had true support in the beginning. It was more of a reaction and an expectation. And so as we move forward, I encourage all organizations, if you haven't done it, if you're feeling these things that are happening, is to find a way to develop the ability to have those uncomfortable conversations within those leadership teams, to come to a consensus and then be able to share that vision and strategy. And then again, don't do that without incorporating those voices within your organization. There has to be a commitment from that level to better understand what the situation is and what our commitment is going to be long term. Otherwise, you do run the risk of having organizations feel fatigued, having individuals feel like, well, I thought that you said we were going to do this, but now I don't see it happening. And I don't think this organization's truly bought in. And so you can avoid a lot of that, I believe.
Great, thank you. Denise, do you want to add anything?
Well said.
All right, yeah. What about if we're on the other side of this and we're part of an organization where maybe leadership hasn't bought into some of these discussions, and you're at an individual level and you're seeing that across maybe the organization, the people that you work with are wanting to implement some things or wanting to see some change. Do you have any advice for people wanting to influence up or manage up with these conversations? It's maybe harder.
You never want to send people into a situation where their jobs or they feel like their livelihoods are at risk, right, for speaking up and speaking out for these things. However, in my own personal experience, some of the most amazing stories I've heard from CEOs and some of the most heartfelt ones are when regular employees reached out to them, whether it was by email or scheduled a meeting, sat down with them and said, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. I think there's an assumption that leaders in the organization are understanding everything that is going on, right? And even things that you might share with your manager or HR, you make the assumption that leaders know exactly my situation. And that's oftentimes not the case. And so when a senior leader, like a CEO or someone, has an opportunity to sit down with you, or someone asks you what your experience is, being able to share with them not just your thoughts, but your lived experience can be really impactful and can be something that leads the organization into taking on some of those initiatives. As I've heard from leaders who were really inspired by the stories and really moved to action because they wanted to change based off of that interaction or conversation they had.
Great.
I think one thing I would add to that would be, great idea. Kingsley and I agree. A lot of change happens when people begin to listen, right? So I think one of the things that would be helpful in those conversations is to come with ideas of the change you want to see. So yes, this is my experience. These are the things that I have gone through. Here's how, as an organization, I feel we can solve that. Get the thoughts around the action started. And then I think that might produce faster outcomes. At least it has a principle. Thank you for that.
That was very well said.
Good. So we've got about 25 seconds left. I want to.
I'll go fast.
So I'm going to take the liberty of highlighting a few things I heard today. I heard a lot, maybe hammered time and time again, of we've got to be having conversations with people. You've got to be talking to people and gathering the ideas so that you're not making these decisions alone. You've got to understand what the people in your organization want, what they're experiencing, what kind of feedback they have, and not make assumptions about what's going on. And then be able to take all of that feedback and information and take action with it, prioritize it and take some action with it so that you can retain that talent that you want to retain and grow the talent that you want to grow and continue to have really good conversations so the organization continues to evolve and your journey continues and it becomes part of your DNA. And all of these great analogies and acronyms that you all have brought to us today. So I do want to thank all three of you for being part of this panel today and sharing the experience that you're having within your organizations and as leaders yourselves within the community and the people that you're serving both inside and outside of your organization. So that wraps it up for us, and I will turn it over to the powers that be.